A word to the wise, we are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. This week, that would be through Chapter 7 in The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson, the second book in the Mistborn series. Hey there, this is Cross.
And I'm PJ.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club.
Now, Crossland, I have a bit of a bone to pick with you.
What's the bone?
You and I now have equal microphones.
It's true.
And I no longer get to feel superior on any aspect of this show.
Except for in stature, my friend.
Well, that's because I'm standing and you're not.
Well, I think it's just in general because you're 6'7" and I'm 5'11".
Irrelevant.
Strike it from the record.
Objection.
Objection. Okay, and we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle... What the fuck am I doing? Anyway, today is our first episode discussing The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. Oh my god. And we are going to chat about chapters 1 through 7. I can't believe I did that. It's good.
No, it's so good. It's so good.
Yep. Whoops. Yeah. Nothing like having the script in front of you and still fucking it up somehow. But before we start talking about the chapters, let's talk about what we're drinking. PJ, what did you make this lovely afternoon?
So I got a new cocktail book and I didn't have most of the ingredients for it, but I did buy some ingredients and I used one of those to make this drink. I bought the Cult of Tiki, or what's it called? Smuggler's Cove is the cocktail book, all about tiki. And I bought a 2-pack like ingredient thing of orange blossom water, which you use to make orgeat, which is really, really prevalent in tiki, and then rose water. So I cracked open the rose water and made a elderflower rose gimlet using the last of the end of days gin that you bought me. So 2 ounces of gin, 1.5 ounces of Saint Germain, which is an elderflower liqueur, 1.5 ounces of lime juice, and half an ounce of simple syrup, and half a teaspoon of rose water. All shaken. Called for a garnish of rose petals. I don't know. It's just after Valentine's Day, but I'm a bad boyfriend and I didn't get any roses, so I didn't have any rose petals to garnish. So just garnishless. Served over ice because Crossland was running late, so I had to keep it chilled somehow. And it's really, really tasty. It's sweet, floral, ginny, elderflowery. Like I don't know what else you want. It's really good though.
Nice. Sounds tasty.
Yeah, pretty good.
Unfortunately, you're out of the gin now, but
I am. I need you to send me more. Following that up, I don't know if it's a seasonal release or
no, it's a constant release. They always have it.
Awesome. I need to come visit you in reality.
See
what really needs to happen. Following that up, I've got Hopsurd, a double dry hopped New England IPA from Hubbard's Cave, which is out of Uni Annie Brewery in Niles, Illinois. I'm not familiar with them at all, but the beer's good. It's a pretty standard New England, nothing super crazy special about it, but it's really well done. So happy to have it.
Nice.
Yeah. What about you, Crossland? What are you drinking?
I am having Rashek's Deepest Regrets, which is a cocktail that I am co-opting the name from someone else's, fucking book, and I'll get to why in a second. But what Rashek's Deepest Regrets is it's a pomegranate martini that I have twisted a little bit. Per the aforementioned snobbery, I decided to make it my own. So I was looking up a pomegranate martini, and I found a good recipe, and I was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting recipe. And then it got really snobby about the type of pomegranate juice that you used, and it delineated between purchased pomegranate juice and hand-squeezed pomegranate juice.
Is that because sometimes they'll add sugar to, like, bottled pomegranate juice? Like, that's the only... that. Fuck them. First of all.
Yeah.
That's really fucking dumb.
And delineating it as purchased is fucking odd.
Yeah, I have tried to squeeze pomegranates before because I needed pomegranate juice for something and didn't have juice, but I had a pomegranate, so I tried. It's super dumb. It doesn't work that well. if you don't have like, I don't know what you would use to juice them, but I just used a juicer and I got all this like really bitter, acrid flavor out of like the pith. Even though I tried to remove as much of it as possible, I think even the seeds, it was really frustratingly complicated and ultimately not that good. So
yeah. The method that I've seen when I like went and looked it up, because I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. Basically, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take just the seeds, throw it into like a mason jar, and then just use like a wooden dowel and just spin it around until you mash as much of the juice out as you can. Keep doing that, and you can do a whole pomegranate, and you'll get half a cup of fucking juice. So sounds like a great use of my time. So instead what I did is I bought Pom like any reasonable person does, which doesn't have sugar added or anything like that, is just pomegranate juice, so fuck off with your bullshit. So anyway, the cocktail again is 2 ounces of vodka, 2 ounces of purchased pomegranate juice, 1 ounce triple sec, of which they recommended Cointreau. I use dry curacao, which is a different flavor profile, a little bit herbier, a little bit more herbaceous than Cointreau's. Cointreau tends to be a little bit more banana-y, banana orange. Both are orangey, but I find dry curacao to be a little bit more herbaceous. And then 1 ounce lemon juice, 1 ounce simple syrup. This is a double of the recipe, so you can have that if you want to, try it at home. But I doubled it because our show goes for a while, and I wanted something to sip on for the whole time. So Rashek's deepest regrets. I took a nice photo of it too, garnished with a lemon. Looked pretty good. To follow that up, I've got a tamarind double from Flytrap. So I think I had this once before, but it is a Belgian style ale, 7%. And I think I've mentioned before, but Flytrap's one of my favorite breweries in town because they do Belgians and they do them well. And so whenever I can, I generally grab one for home. And so we went there for my birthday, which was on Tuesday, and we won trivia, and I bought one and brought one home.
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. Not like we haven't talked since then, but you literally called me on my birthday.
That's true.
I forgot to explain what this tastes like. Soup. It's nice and sweet. It's a little tart. And like I said, using that dry curacao really gets that orange through. It's so interesting and complex because you've got like the pomegranate, which is its own kind of like tardiness. And then from the curacao, you've got this orange and kind of like just this tiniest hint of herbs like rosemary, like just a little bit in the background of the cocktail, just a little bit of that herbaceousness. And obviously the lemon contributes to the tart flavor, but it's delicious.
So I want to address the pomegranate thing again. I can see the rationale if you equate it to like lime and lemon juice, how like fresh squeezed is always going to be better than bottled, even if it's like organic and like nothing added, not from concentrate, all that stuff. But every single bartender that I've talked to or seen YouTube videos on or like read about or anything like that talk about pomegranate juice and how like it doesn't seem like there's any delineation as far as I can tell. It's tart enough, but not like it doesn't seem like a volatile juice in the same way that lime and lemon, like citrus juices are. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what to tell you.
I think we've mentioned it on the show before, too, but the reason that bartenders have so much experience with pomegranate juice is because grenadine is pomegranate syrup, basically. It's a pomegranate simple syrup. So with orange blossom water, it's like the biggest delineation that, helps you make grenadine.
We are saying delineate a lot today.
Yeah, I don't know. My brain's just on it. People have a lot of experience with pomegranate juice, and people are just like, buy Pom at this point. Pom is such a wide and pervasive brand. A lot of people think that grenadine is cherry, but it's actually... pomegranate. So like bartenders have to work with this shit all the time. I think the only thing that I might consider doing that I haven't thought of, that I didn't think of before, is getting like pre-plucked seeds. So like seeds that are already removed from the carcass of the pomegranate, and then trying to just add sugar so that it emaciates it, and then just have a syrup from that. And maybe that'll be, it wouldn't quite be grenadine, but it might be close enough to kind of like an extract.
I wonder if that film, the membrane on each of the seeds is fragile enough to be emaciated by sugar.
I bet it is. If not, just give it a quick mashy boy, and it'll give it up.
Yeah.
Just like they're saying, use a wooden dowel and stir it for 30 minutes and blah, blah, blah. It's just, fuck you. Anyway, all right, let's get into the episode. So if you guys remember our last episode, Mistborn 10, we moved last week's predictions to the end of the episode. And I think we're going to do that going forward. I actually really like that. I think it made a lot of sense because we could clearly answer the questions at the end, and we can flag predictions as we go. add them really easily with the system that we have now. So we're going to do that from now on. I think it's kind of a permanent fixture.
Yeah, I think it made sense.
With that, let's move into our breakdown here. We start off with, obviously, this is part 1 of a brand new book, starting the second book here, Well of Ascension, and the first part is called Heir of the Survivor. Any thoughts? I mean,
it's pretty clear. Even beforehand, I figured they were talking about Vin. Like when I first saw that term, I don't know.
I think that's interesting because I think it's Vin, but I also think it's Elend. I think that they're all heirs of the Survivor, and I think that's kind of what it's pointing you to, is like all of these people variously have to deal with the shit that Kelsier left.
Yeah, I can see that. Basically, everybody that we deal with, Sazed being, yeah. Okay. I'm fair.
I agree with you. The people from the Church of the Survivor point to Vin being the heir, as it stands, but not holistically the same. But
right,
yeah. So with that, let's move into chapter 1 here. We've got our very first quote from who we eventually learn to be named Quan, who found Elendi. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But the very first quote to start off the book here is, "I write these words in steel, for anything not set in metal cannot be trusted." And what a fucking opener. Like, that is a crazy good opening line.
Yeah. We do get a callback to it later on, but right away, my first thought was like, I can't wait to continue to be like frustrated and like unsure about these entries and like who's writing them. We figure out pretty quickly who it is, like explicitly by name in the entries themselves. But
were you concerned that we weren't going to figure out who it was? That it was going to be like another mystery?
Yep. I wasn't sure if it was like just other entries from the same book or if it was something entirely different. And I was kind of looking forward to that speculation, but...
Well, now it's like, why is this important? Which is interesting in a different way, right?
Right.
I intentionally picked the chapters so that we would read past the point of that discovery and like leave other questions lingering. Because while a good question, it's answered pretty early and pretty definitively,
Right. For sure.
And it leaves other questions in our mind. So
even out of context and removed from this story, I really like this quote.
Yeah.
It's a cool quote. I don't know.
What? I definitely want to talk about this as we go, but you can tell between books that Brandon got better at writing. Like, this book is incredible comparatively. Like, I love Mistborn. I love it for exactly what it is, but there's just a little bit more flourish. And in particular, I know that I just called I write these words in steel to be like the first line, but the real first line of the regular story, the army crept like a dark stain across the horizon. That's pretty fucking good and evocative. Like, that's an evocative without being overly descriptive phrase.
Yeah. There's a lot of that in this section.
Yeah. So I just like listening to it, because I was listening to it while I was working out, and then I read it again. I was just like, holy shit, this is so good. I'm also reading Elantris right now, which is his first book. And so it's interesting to have gone from second book to first book to third book now and kind of be reading them in this order. Published, that's the order that he published them in. Technically, it's 6th, 7th, and 8th book, but that he'd written. So, yeah, it's just so good.
Yep.
Much better. And it's like one of those things that you don't know you're missing until it improves. It's like, oh yeah, that was good. And now it's like, oh, this is better.
Yeah. I don't think I ever had a thought of this is poorly written throughout Mistborn.
Yeah. Right.
It always seemed good. But this is a step ahead.
Yeah. It's just elevated a little bit. We open up our story, of course, as I had mentioned, with Elend Venture's perspective, King Elend Venture's perspective, I should say. A year after the decisive battle that ended the Lord Ruler's reign, he's standing on his parapet looking out as the army of his father, Straf Venture, marches on Luthadel. And like I said, that dark stain moving across the horizon is such a good visual. What do you think about like our scene setting with this first chapter and this kickoff point?
First of all, how dare you not call him King Straf Venture, as he refers to himself.
I'm sorry, my liege. I'll do better next time. Don't behead me, please.
No.
Elend wouldn't behead anyone. Let's be real.
Straf, sorry.
Oh, Straf. Straf is not the king.
King Straf Venture is what he calls himself in his correspondence.
Yeah, it's true. It's true, because he's king of the Eastern Dominance, which is where Urutau is. I always forget these.
I don't know.
Especially if you look at the map.
I think I commented on that before.
Northern dominance.
I think we even talked about this earlier. I wasn't sure if I could look at the map, so I haven't.
I highly recommend it because if you look at the map, there are 5 dominances, and they're not exactly split properly in the angular directions that we're used to, with north being north. It was kind of like north was like northeast. You know, it's an interesting split because like eastern is like really southern, and it just seems silly. It's just like slightly off.
Gotcha. I think this sort of 1 year time jump works really well. It gives us the sense of being a little bit established, but still a fresh government, like still facing growing pains, still facing political strife and like unrest between houses that are still kind of shaking out and like who's leading what. And without having to be like brand new, how are we structuring this government? We still get a fledgling government that we're seeing in person, I guess. I don't know. I don't know. What did you think of it? Your first time reading it, the time jump, because it's not significant. It's not like crazy, but it's a year.
No, I mean, it's scene dressing for the most part because, like, the immediate fallout, you know, I think about other comparisons of other stories that I've read, and I think, like, a year time jump between books is super reasonable. I think that that's enough time to, like, have things kind of develop to an interesting point, as opposed to needing to, like, literally dictate every single change that characters experience day to day to day to day that can just draw out a series to almost a ridiculous point. Like, if we picked up right after The Lord Ruler without any kind of a break, you know, that feels a little bit less natural than it probably would be. That book is probably really boring. That's why we didn't start there, you know?
Yeah. I think there could be really interesting points in it, though.
Yeah, there could be interesting points, but I think that by and large...
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Don't get me wrong. I 100% agree with you. I think this was the right move. But I think you could have also jumped too far. Yeah. And we get kind of the best of both worlds in seeing this government not quite entirely established, but established enough that it's not boring.
Yeah, that it's got a decent foundation and it's set up well. So, So we then cut, of course, from Elend to Vin and get a quick reintroduction to Allomancy just to make sure we hadn't forgotten the rules, as well as some discussions of Kelsier's formal training and kind of the sort of difference there, and Vin using her Allomancy for her entire life up until this point. She mentions that she's been sparring with someone that she refers to as the Watcher as well. There's some interesting little tidbits here. What do you think?
First of all, is that a drink for me?
So I'm not going to call it a drink yet. And here's why. I thought about this when you had written it. And the reason why is because while we have basically proved you wrong, we do not actually know the answer of when Vin snapped yet. So we can't reflect on it and talk about, oh, your prediction was this degree off. Like, how close were you?
But I predicted it was something to do with Reen and Reen leaving.
Yeah. Yep. I understand. Your prediction is wrong, but we don't have the answer yet, which I think is why I would say.
Okay.
We generally have the answer before we settle a prediction, not the counter answer.
Yeah,
unless I know that the.
But we know this is wrong though, or we know it can't be.
There's a gamification here that is important to me, so I need to keep that card on the table.
Okay, fine.
You may not agree with it anymore, which is fun, and we can maybe update it and keep it that way. We can maybe even let you double down and sink another drink into it if you want, but that could be fun and interesting. But yeah, I want to keep it. I don't want to take it off the table.
That's fine. Fine by me. Yeah. I'm almost done with my drink anyway because we've been.
Jesus Christ!
I made it early. And then you pushed our recording time, and then we did the Devil's Cut thing, which, if you want to listen to the Devil's Cut, where we talk about bullshit for like 20 minutes before the episode, sign up for our Patreon. And I don't know, I made it a couple hours ago at this point.
Yeah, good work. It wasn't that, well, it was like an hour ago. It was a little bit over an hour ago, hour 15. Because you were ready to go at like 1, and I wasn't on until 1:15. So
yeah, I made it before that.
Yeah. Well, I was on the phone with you while you made it, so it's not like you didn't know that I was running behind. I was very communicative.
I wanted to clean up before I...
So, getting back to it, though, obviously, we also get this like reintroduction to Allomancy, right? I think it's important to clarify. We'll talk about this a little bit more in the next chapter, because that's where it really gets kind of heavy with the battle and kind of introducing us to all the things that are possible, or reintroducing, I should say. But I think that this is interesting because I think that this is also a symptom of publishing a book annually. If you need to publish a book with time in between, you might need to remind your readers of the system and of all the rules and everything, because they've probably read other things before that. They're not going back to back to back like we are, because they were reading 2006 and then 2007 and then 2009, I think, are the publishing dates. But
yeah, between this section and the next chapter, like you mentioned, I really appreciate that this reintroduction to Allomancy isn't necessarily spoon-fed or like condescending in its description. Like, it's not super simplified and like reiterated, but it's also not obfuscated in any sort of way that's difficult to follow. Like, it's a kind of a fine line that Branderson's walking here, and it's well done. So yeah, I appreciated it. Granted, I jumped straight from Mistborn into this. Like, that was the last thing I read. So I think what's also clear when we get into the next chapter is that he's gotten more concise at being able to describe these things too. There's a little bit more of a deft hand with explaining how these different actions happen as well, which I think is useful for communicating action. But going back to chapter 1 anyway, because kind of moving ahead and back and forth, we also see Orsur inhabiting a new body and a different body than he last was. I think the last time we saw him, he was wearing Kelsier's bones. And of course, this comes up even more within the next chapter, but I wanted to bring him up here. This is kind of our introduction to Orsur for the most part as an individual, as opposed to him being Lord Renew. Right. Did we get Orsur's name in the first book? Orsur's name was definitely dropped in the first book. It was something that Kelsier talked about buying his contract, Orsur's contract, early on in the book, and I made a big point about bringing it up just to see, and you're like, what the fuck does that mean? Was kind of your reaction to the whole thing. You had no idea. You weren't tracking it as the Kandra thing. You thought it was like a weapon thing and something like that. It turns out it kind of was. It was a political weapon, if you really want to think about it that way. But yeah, I'm interested in the naming conventions of the Kandra, because the two that we have now are Orsur and Tensoon, right? Mm-hmm. Were there any others? I think it was just those two. Nope. That's it so far. And both of them, two names, concatenated and camel cased. So I don't know if that's significant or if there's anything more to it than that, or if it's just kind of cultural and that's how they name themselves. Or if somebody names them. I don't know. It's interesting. So yeah, like you said, it's an interesting naming convention for sure. And it should be a telltale sign of those names maybe going forward too, if you notice something concatenated like that. And perhaps. But if you're listening, you're fucked, for the record. I think one of our patrons and I discussed this, that if you are strictly a listener, you are totally have no idea on the side of the Kandra naming convention. And so you're kind of left out of this information bubble that exists when you read and listen, or, reference material, whatever you do. Yeah. Yeah. Interested in seeing where the naming convention goes, if there's more to it. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I kind of want to chat a little bit from a meta perspective, just to end this first chapter. First chapter is our first impressions of a book, right? And you've read enough of them where you can kind of get some semblance of an idea at this point. And by that, I mean, you've read enough within the spectrum of our podcast. I know you've read books before, but with kind of the analysis that we're doing, given what we know from this first 6 pages, what does it leave you thinking we're going to see within this first book? I mean, given what we've seen so far, it seems like this is going to be less of a heist movie kind of theme and more of a political focused fantasy. Okay. So a little bit of high level army strategy, a little bit of infiltration and subterfuge, a little bit of a love story between Vin and Elend. It's going to be spanning a lot of that, but I think mostly centered around the seat of power, I guess. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. I think as far as first chapters go, this gets us grounded back in the reality of Mistborn if we spend time away. It gives us a very clear picture of our POVs, and we have our primary players. We have Vin, we have Orsur, we have Elend, and we have Straf that are kind of introduced, not necessarily as POVs, and the Watcher, this mysterious Watcher. So we kind of get a lot of players within this first chapter that are clearly going to be important. It sets the tone, and it does, like you say, provide this idea that this is going to be political intrigue, a little bit of love, a little bit of everything from the last one, but no heisty boys. Yeah. So Though
Yeah.
it does kind of leave that open still a little bit.
Mhm.
In that we don't know about the Atium horde, as it were, yet. I've got my own ideas about that, but I think we'll get to that later.
Yeah. So we move on from that, of course, into chapter 2.
I do have to say, before we get into chapter 2 real quick, I just took my first sip of Hubbard's Cave, and I don't remember this. I don't know if this is just an off can or what, but it's a lot more dank than a lot of New England's. Like, and almost to the point of being like that sort of marijuana note that you get from some more resinous hop varietals, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't remember that out of this.
When was the last time you had it?
This is my 4th in a 4-pack. But
oh, okay.
It's not usually the first one I drink. So there's that. It's usually like, oh, I've had 2 beers. Let's grab another one. Oh, what's this one? So
you're leading with it this time. So it's a little bit of a different.
Not on my game as far as taste buds go from the first 3.
Okay, moving into chapter 2, we've got our first entry in the logbook here. Or rather, our second one, excuse me. We kick it off there. I've begun to wonder if I'm the only sane man left. Can the others not see? They've been waiting so long for their hero to come, the one spoken of in Terra's prophecies, that they quickly jump to conclusions, presuming that each story and legend applies to this one man.
I feel like we've talked about this before in the first book, in the idea that like these prophecies aren't necessarily all connected.
I think you made mention, yeah.
Yeah. So to me, this felt like a really rational take on the idea and how everybody's kind of getting caught up in this hero of ages idea. And looking at it a little bit more critically, maybe you come to the conclusion that it doesn't have to be a single person.
I think that's another really interesting point to analyze this is, as we know that this is Quan a little bit later, like I think within the next 2 chapters. This is the guy who picked out the hero of ages, who determined that Alendi was the hero of ages. And so he, interestingly enough, after basically propelling and prophesying this man, is the only one who feels like he was wrong to begin with. And that's an interesting dichotomy to be like, oh shit, I made the wrong call, and now I can't undo the damage done.
And we definitely see that flip from Alendi's perspective in the first book. Mm-hmm. When he's lamenting over Quan's
betrayal.
Yeah, betrayal, or even before the betrayal, just kind of the contempt that starts coming out.
The contempt was Rashek. Quan was just strictly a betrayal. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's hard to keep track of those 2 in that original logbook, which you confused one other time, and I was like, no, that's not quite right. But it did end up becoming resentment for sure on the side of Alendi towards him for the betrayal, but also understanding. He tried to come out and understand it because he went from the most important. Quan went from Alendi's perspective. Quan went from the most important dude to the like second most important dude who called out him, and so he thought it was jealousy potentially was the reaction. And why he betrayed him. He was trying to rationalize Quan's betrayal. Yeah. It is interesting, though, because it does have this sort of dualistic take. You can compare pretty readily already. I don't think that this is even a stretch. You can compare Kelsier's actions in the first book to Quan kind of in the unintended consequences of his decisions and such. Like, you can see those unfolding kind of in live time.
Yeah, I can see that. There's less of the going back on the thoughts, you know, as far as like finding Vin and then wondering if Vin is actually who he thought she was.
I wasn't so much saying that. I was thinking more on the side of the unintended consequences of upending the Empire, right?
Gotcha.
Less on like what actually happened with Kelsier, but the end result of Kelsier's actions.
Okay. Yeah, I can see
you prop up this person, you realize you did the wrong thing. You prop up this idea, you realize that maybe it was wrong. And that's or maybe like it wasn't as easy as it was going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
Fair enough. Cool. All right. I think that chapter 2, though, is interesting because it gets into this kind of conversation, right? Brandon is still going through and reminding us of the rules of Allomancy, like we said, in case there were any questions, through an incredible action sequence. You know, it's very much a show, don't tell, which I think is a great way of reminding us of these rules. He also gives us a little bit of backstory inside of these moments and perspective on Vin throughout the scene and sequence and the way that she's come to adapt to her new life protecting King Elend Venture and being that assassin that we discussed at the end of the last book.
Yeah. Yeah, she's going to be a really fucking good assassin, man. We already see it. We already see her strengths, and her weaknesses are entirely internal, but kind of lend themselves to being a person skulking in the night and like hiding. So even her personal weaknesses could be twisted and like presented as strengths for the role that she's trying to fill. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that feels very intentional on the part of Brandon to say like, hey, even what you consider to be your worst qualities are still good for what you do, and you've twisted them into something that it's you, right? So Vin, of course, proceeds through this action sequence to fight 8 assassins, pressing through and cutting through them when a coin from another angle comes down, and the coin shot, one of the 8 people that are there, is forced to react. The shot, of course, is fired by the Watcher, the one who was discussed previously as sparring with Vin in the first chapter. Do you have any guesses as to who the Watcher is or their motives?
Fuck, dude. Is it Kelsier? Like, I was so ready to just accept a character's death for once. Like, I was so ready for it. Now I'm going back on it. I don't know. That or it's Marsh. It's possible. Fuck. I have to pick one, don't I? Well, I mean, if we're gonna like use this as a prediction, I have to pick one.
Definitely a prediction, but I will allow for you to suspect that it could be anything, right? Like, it doesn't need to be an existing character. It could be.
I'm going to.
It could be a new character.
Fuck. All right.
PJ is pacing around his room right now in anxiety for this idea.
Because I was so ready. I was so emotionally ready to just let go of a character for once. For fucking once. Pierce Brown ruined me for that. And now I'm like turning my back on that whole embracing the death. So, I don't know. Kelsier.
All right. As the battle progresses, we see why it is that the Watcher shot the coin at the coin shop. It's because in reality, he is a Mistborn hiding among the assassins. Also, the Watcher kills the smoker at the same, like he shot earlier to try to indicate to Vin, like point in the direction of like, come on, like this is clearly one of them. And then on top of that, he actually kills the smoker to stop the hiding in Allomancy so that she can pierce with bronze and actually sense that he is more than just a coin shot. Vin calls out to Orsur with a code phrase for her to throw him, or for him to throw her Atium. She downs the vial and dispatches the first couple of assassins, taking a beating while doing so. But more importantly, that was Vin's final bead of Atium.
Yeah, interesting point. Final bead of Atium. Clearly, other Mistborn still have access to some. So that's going to be a point of problem going forward. Yeah, that's trouble. That stash is still missing, which, again, I've got ideas. But, I had something I wanted to bring up, and I can't remember exactly what it was. Oh, thinking about bodies and whether or not somebody's alive or not. We know that most Allomancers can't interact with metal that's like inside of somebody. Does that only apply if they're alive? Like, could Vin just take the iron from people's blood and like throw bodies around at other people if they're not living anymore?
That is...
Or unused metals in their stomachs, specifically.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Maybe.
It'd be pretty cool.
Interesting.
Like,
yeah.
Dispatch a Mistborn and take their Atium.
Yeah.
It's kind of gross having to swallow that, but...
Yeah, you get some weird bile on it. We're having to like restore it in like a tube, and you have to like push it down with your finger into the tube because it's no longer just flakes. It's like guts.
Oh God!
Could you imagine like swallowing someone's stomach so you could digest their metals, like squeezing it out? Anyway,
all right, yep.
That's like the R-rated version of Mistborn.
No, but like that's one thing that I never quite grasped from the first book was why having it inside of somebody stops the effect. even just being pierced into somebody's arm. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. Is it just because they're alive?
You know, maybe that is the rule. It is interesting because I think Vin literally says something along the lines of like, she knows the rules, she doesn't care. So like, she's not investigating the rules further. It's something to that effect that comes out in these first 2 chapters. And I thought that was really funny. That she doesn't care about the rules of like what pulling things in or out of the body or and whatnot. I think it's in reference to maybe her pulling on the mists too. That might be a little bit later, but I think
you're right.
Yeah. Or Sword after the battle brings up something, you know, he's shot through with coins, broken, bleeding in a bunch of places, but brings up something new that Vin derides as the almighty contract, because he's prevented from like eating one of the bodies of the assassins, and she's coming up with an alternate plan. But he brings up like he has to listen to her because of the contract. What do you make of this guide for the Kandra and for their behavior? Or Sewers at the very least.
So here are more rules that I don't understand, and I want to know. This feels very demonic in nature.
Okay.
Like, or a devilish pact, and how that's binding to the soul to a certain extent and cannot be broken. So, like, I'm getting that sort of vibe, but then later on we get that sort of contradiction in that it seems like it's possible to break that pact, but he just doesn't want to, and he'd prefer to die rather than, like, break the contract. But that doesn't seem to me that it's impossible to break it. It's just that he doesn't want to. Like, maybe there are personal consequences to it. I don't know. At least right here, first time reading it, it felt like a devilish pact.
Okay. That's interesting. Are you upset at Vin for not letting him take a regular body?
No, not at all.
I'm just curious. We'll get to the body that he gets later, but I wanted to know.
No, right. I found it hilarious.
Yes, awesome. With that, we move into chapter 3. Chapter 3. So we start off here with the logbook. Of course, my brethren ignore the rest of the facts. They cannot connect the other strange things that are happening. They are deaf to my objections and blind to my discoveries. You can just feel the resentment kind of pouring off of that.
You can just hear the contempt.
Yep.
The way that it's written. It's not like single or like 2-word sentences, but it still feels very staccato in the way that it's written and just direct and intentional and contempt. I don't know.
He's also carving this into metal. Like, that's another thing to consider.
That's a good point.
Yeah. There's a lot of either that might take a lot of effort, or alternatively, it's like just a fucking nightmare, and he only has so much space, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah, that's a good point.
We don't know that yet. Yeah.
Yep.
Being ignored by your peers sucks. Anyway, moving on.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what do you do? Anyway, Elend is dealing with something familiar here. Late night work to keep the gears turning. He's confronted with a very real problem after a rebellion. How the hell do you put it all together and make it work properly like you wanted it to in the first place? He's dealing with that transition from his books, his metaphors, his philosophy into making that as real as it possibly can be in modern society.
Yeah. And I mean, here's the true delineation between the thinkers and the doers, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can think about the ideal way something's going to go forever, but doing is so much less predictable, and you have to act on the fly, and things are going to come up that you didn't predict. Like, we get this later on, but the populace in general, they're used to the Lord Ruler and don't even have a way of understanding that something new is going to be better than what they dealt with. Like, they had a place to sleep. They had food. Like, they were regularly abused and beaten, but at least they didn't have to fend for themselves for the most part, as far as like shelter and food go.
Yeah, right. It is such a compelling reason for Vin or for Elend to seek action and seek change, right? And it is frustrating because people don't understand the opportunity that they're presented with. The Ska don't understand the opportunity that they have because of a lack of education, because of a number of different reasons, because of cultural oppression, because of all kinds of things. And that's a tough pill to swallow, I think, for any and all of the characters. And on top of that, Elend has to deal with the previous ruling class and the obligators and everyone else that previously existed, which is in and of itself difficult. So he has to tamper expectations of the nobleman, and he also has to try to uplift the ska and give representation, and it's a difficult juggling act.
It's a lot to take care of all by one person. Good thing he's not alone. He's got
not entirely
friends.
Alone. He's got some friends. He's got some friends now. We hop back to Vin for a little bit more, reflecting on the events of the past book and subsequent year, mostly thinking about the Lord Ruler's defeat and how the legends have sprung up around her now, as opposed to Kelsier to some degree, making her out to be this legendary hero. Except for, well, like, she kind of actually is. Like, she kind of actually did this.
She absolutely is. Mm-hmm. But I don't think she's the kind of person that would ever admit to being a hero, regardless of how much personal growth we see her go through. Like, she's a humble person, and a lot of that, unfortunately, is born out of abuse and abandonment. But at the same time, like, you know, she's not going to have a hero complex going forward. She's not going to have an ego that's going to ruin everything, you know?
Right. I agree. I think that is one of the most interesting things about Vin is there. I mean, if we're talking about archetypes, right? Like, characters are often handed responsibility, and a lot of them are sort of the humble leaders, right? Like, Luke Skywalker is a little arrogant, becomes humbled, you know, kind of moves forward that way. Vin was humbled to begin with, and Vin does not elevate herself to even the level or rank of hero, and does not believe that. She's just a Mistborn who got lucky, you know? Yeah. And the legends and the stories are not of her own. You know, she doesn't claim them as hers in any degree.
That's a good point, and something I hadn't really put a whole lot of thought into, and I think you've mentioned it towards the end of one of the last episodes of the previous book. But the fact that she referred to her powers as luck, like, she is so lacking in luck in the beginning of the first book that, like, she quantifies it and, like, puts it into a physical sense.
Yeah,
and
like,
I don't
any
think
of the
she
pushes. Yeah. That's interesting. It's like a manifestation. Like, her ability to influence things, she considers luck, not her actually exerting influence. Yeah,
exactly.
That is interesting. I hadn't fully connected that dot until you said it, which is why I jumped in. Yeah. Excellent. Yes. On top of that, we also get a reflection of Vin on Kelsier and how imperfect he was. The survivor Hatson was a good man responsible for the plan to topple the final empire, but he was flawed. He had blind spots, perhaps the biggest blind spot being his rage for noblemen and not realizing how hard it was going to be to pick up the pieces after he broke the empire. You know, this is kind of a tough point for Vin to reckon with and kind of sit with. What did you think about it?
I mean, it's certainly short-sighted to have such a grudge against the noblemen. But I think that's a trade-off that kind of has to be there. It's kind of necessary in that he was a man of passion, and all of his actions were actions of passion for the most part. Like, well thought out, but his motivation was passionate. And when you feel so strongly about something, you can't just turn that passion off while keeping it on for other aspects of the plan. You know? Like, in order to have as much conviction as he did, he had to go all out on it. And unfortunately, that meant collateral damage in the way of the people that could potentially lead after the toppling of the Lord Ruler.
And to that point, I guess he had some foresight, right? Like, he did have enough foresight to try to move people into the right place, but not nearly as much as he needed to have. You know, he was still very short-sighted.
That was something he kept going back and forth on too. And I don't know if that was just oversight in the editing process, but it felt like sometimes he was so ruthless with any ska that were sympathetic to or work for any noble people. And sometimes he, like, forgave any ska people that worked for the nobles because they were trying to do their best and trying to survive, and, like, they came and joined the rebellion. Like, there was not a ton of consistency there. And I'm trying to figure out if there's a thread that I'm missing, or if there's logic that I'm missing in his, like, rationale. Do you know?
I think I can point to a couple of examples, and I kind of know what you're talking about. So if we look at, like, the very beginning prologue, right? Like, he's not He's not killing the people that are on Tressing's farm. He liberates them and saves them, right?
Right.
They're workers, though. I think the biggest difference is that when Ska are warriors and they are actively trying to fight him, even if they're protecting, he would kill them. That's the biggest delineation. I think that's where he is consistent, is if they were Ska fighting, he would kill them.
But he accepts some of them into the rebellion army.
Eventually.
After the fact.
Yes. Yeah.
But even after, like, he accepts them, and then after that goes and, like, murders a bunch of Ska people that are guarding a noble house and doesn't feel any remorse for it, and, like, argues with Marsh about it.
Well, yeah, because when he breaks in to go steal the shit, right? Like, he ultimately does kill a bunch of Ska. And I think later when he destroys most of the Tikil house, he kills a bunch of Ska. So I think that those are warriors that weren't going to join the cause, though, and they were in the way at the moment. So it's like a moment-to-moment thing. I would argue, though, that I think his morals changed after the conversation with Marsh and then into the conversations with Vin. So there's that component there. I think he was being consistent with the "you're in my way. Now you get to get out of my," as like heads squelched on the pavement and we're thrown out of windows and fucking, you know. Yeah. He was ruthless with Ska. So
this is why rereading is so important, and I am excited to have time to do that.
Or a sounding board sometimes, you know.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, just to go back and look at early chapters with the context and like look for the
specific follow-up points.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I think that Kelsier is an interesting and very complicated character. Obviously, we are living in the legacy of Kelsier right now, and I don't think that's going to change, you know? So Vin then has a very strange interaction while burning bronze, listening to the thrumming of metal, sounding like a distant drum, until she actually does notice someone burning metals. She's able to pierce through a cloud, and there's an image in the mist forming, becoming more solid as it is encircled by the mists. And when it takes a step forward, Vin freaks the fuck out, throws coins, and jumps away. What do you think this could be? I forgot to make this a prediction. This is a prediction.
Interesting. Yeah. So I think this is what the Lord Ruler warned about, what Rashek warned about on his like final moments, in that he was seemingly actively doing something and holding something at bay.
Okay.
This, in conjunction with what Marsh talks about later, that the mists are starting to come in the daytime. Like, now that the Lord Ruler's influence is gone, there's something coming back, and something malicious is happening. So, and I think that also sets up, I don't know if you can call it a singular villain, but the antagonist for the rest of the story, at least for this book, and probably, I would imagine, going forward. Because it seems very fucking big. I don't know.
It seems like a big point that feels like we'll be reiterating throughout the story. Yeah, I mean, the thing here is that this is something from the mist, right? It appears to be something from the mist. So we hop back in. So we obviously move from this point with the monster, right, that's forming in the mist, or the person, the individual that takes that step forward. Vin freaks the fuck out. It's a very interesting kind of shift. And, you know, it is one of those things where it's like, maybe the Lord Ruler was right. And then there's all these different perspectives. Like, maybe there was something bigger here, and like we didn't really take it into consideration. You know, we didn't actually listen. Uh-oh. So we hop back to Elend, and we start with him by triumphantly finishing his homework. I mean, like, the documents of his proposal. But we get the letter from his father, which he opens up, which is, you know, in and of himself his own antagonist. That reads very much like, "Good boy, thanks for watching the house. Now open up the gates for me." And I fucking hate this man. I hate Straf Venture. He, of course, Elend talks a little bit more about the dangers of Straf and how dangerous he is to the central dominance, which I believe is also the first time they start to use these phrases to determine geography.
Yeah. This is, I think, the point that I was talking about earlier, the correspondence where he like signs off as King Straf Venture.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Fuck this dude. Like, what a cockroach of a person. But, I mean, he gave Elend control of the house in Luthadel, right? Like,
yep, willfully handed it off.
It was intended to be a malicious act and like a way of basically getting rid of his son, like his fuck up son, but he did it. So fuck you, dude. Like, You abdicated the position.
Yep. Absolutely.
Fuck
absolutely
him.
No disagreement for me. It's just ridiculous. Straf is the biggest piece of shit.
Yeah.
I just have such a hard time with him. He sucks.
Our boy Straf.
Yeah, our boy Straf. Oh, fuck. We also finally get a look behind the curtain at Vin and Elend's blossoming relationship. They're still flirting like they were before, but there is like a curious note here that kind of ends this or is in the back of Elend's mind. The fact that Elend had proposed and she declined. So he offered marriage and she decided not to. Why do you think she did that? Why the fuck didn't I make this a prediction? It is now.
Okay. I think there are a couple different reasons, and I'm sure it's not single-faceted in general, but I think a couple of the points would be, one, self-image in general, like, and the feeling of being unworthy, which is something that isn't true, and we know that, but it's something that Vin struggles with, and I believe will probably struggle with for the rest of the story. For as long as we know Vin, I'm sure that's something that she is going to personally struggle with, and we'll see progression towards feeling worthy of love and attention and not being entirely afraid of abandonment, but it's deep rooted in her. Going beyond that, I think another point is distraction. And she seems to be taking this role of royal assassin really, really seriously.
Yeah.
And adding a marriage to that will not be so conducive to honing those skills and figuring out that position. Because she's forging her own way and like what that means. So,
yeah, all right.
Yeah,
I think you hammered the nail there. So I don't know. I don't feel like there's anything to talk about thematically. I think you did it. The depth of their relationship, I think, is really interesting too. Moving between the two stories, like it's clear that despite, like you were kind of saying, despite this feeling of unworthiness on Vin's part. It's kind of not unnecessary, like it's unwarranted, but it's her own self-image, and so Elend at the same time respects that and understands. And there's kind of an interesting mutual understanding. He still is kind of has in the back of his head, has like a little bit of like, okay, well, I get it, but like I wish that weren't the case, but it's okay. And that doesn't need to be the end-all be-all of their relationship. He picked the oddest girl with the, I think, oddest. My God, what does he say? It's something really funny like that, though. God damn. It's so good.
I can't remember the terminology.
It's so funny. I mean, it's not that funny, but it's like, it's just funny enough, right? That's Vin freaking out. Women are difficult enough to understand, and I had to go and pick the oddest one of the lot. It's just like, it's his own, it's the oddest one of the lot that gets me personally. And I'm like, it's a funny little bit.
It is.
Another detail here, of course, that's very important within Elend's perspective, they weren't able to find the Lord Ruler's cache. We've talked about this a little bit earlier, and they don't believe that Atium exists, and it seems to be what's drawing Straf to him, and eventually we learn some other powers as well, beyond just the power of the central dominance, because of the power that Atium could provide to whoever owns it.
Yeah.
There's an interesting little power vacuum, power sink that's going on.
There is. I know I talked about this in the first book. And I think I'm still on board with that idea in that the Atium being mined and used and hoarded by the Lord Ruler wasn't being hoarded at all, but was being used. And I think now, knowing a little bit more, I think, I don't know, I was trying to think it was something to do with like using a whole lot of Atium at once gave some like weird elevated like time powers.
Sure.
But I don't think that's the case. I think it's something more to do with keeping whatever it is he was keeping at bay. Like whatever he was actively doing to protect humanity, like you mentioned, and clearly something now is coming up and being a problem. I think he was using Atium to do that.
Okay.
So
all right.
It was all used. It's all been burned, is basically my guess.
Bro, you're making so many good predictions here that I'm just continuing to flag question by question. Little tiny predicty boys. We got to start off the story with something,
Yeah.
I think it is conspicuous. The fact that this is missing is very conspicuous, and it seems to be incongruous with the details that we've gotten previously about the Lord Ruler and kind of hoarding the Atium, and the fact that it's missing leads you down the path logically of like, well, the Lord Ruler must have been burning it because we know he's an Allomancer. There's some sort of other purpose here that we just aren't quite aware of.
So one thing I really want to know is what a ferrochemist could do with Atium, because it is an internal metal, correct?
I think so.
Yeah,
pretty sure.
So
it's an external metal because you're projecting other people's shadows.
So is gold internal?
Gold is an internal metal. We know that because it projects yourself, right? So very, very simply,
with our understandings of ferrochemists, they could use gold, hypothetically.
Yes.
I don't know what that would mean or what they could do with it, but...
Wait, use gold for what? What are you... Oh, yeah, the ferrochemists could use gold. Yes. Ferrochemy, we actually know the answer to that. Ferrochemy with gold is... youth. It's storing age.
Oh, right. Yep.
Yeah.
We did learn that.
I had to confirm before I said it out loud. I was like, wait a minute.
That was in the epilogue, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, that was in the epilogue. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Totally.
Gotcha. Okay. Never mind.
Whew. Some of these things I'm dodging bullets around, and I'm like, I just have to make sure that I don't say anything until I figure out exactly what it is and double check and look it up and remember. So there's some shit here. That's,
and now you have to do it without making facial expressions, which is funny.
I think I'm doing fine.
You're doing well.
I pause and I stare off into the distance and I intensely read, and I'm like, okay, stare up at the ceiling, internalize. What am I going to say? Say it to PJ in a dress. It's my motions at the moment. Exactly. So our final note in this chapter, moving on from the Atium, it adds some geography into the equation. Talked a little bit about it earlier, but the assassins that came and that Vin dispatched were from the Western Dominance, from Fadrix, not from Urto, the hereditary homeland of the Venture family in the Eastern Dominance. We also get another name, the king of the Western Dominance, Ashweather Set. And
what a kingly name. What a kingly name.
It's a pretty cool name, not gonna lie. But yeah, so we get a little bit of geography. We get these maps. We get kind of some interesting shit. What'd you make of the expanding world of Mistborn?
So this was the point where I really wanted to look at the map and couldn't remember. I know we talked about this a couple times, and we talked about it at the beginning of the show, but you had explicitly told me not to look at the map in, I think, Red Rising or Golden Sun. Because
Red Rising...
Yeah.
Because of the specific houses, yeah.
That, for me, was always just, from now on, never look at any external source material other than the exact text of what we're reading. So, I need to study this map more, because now I've got it open, and you're right, it's kind of fucked.
So I read this entire book, right, the first time that I read it, last summer, and I was oblivious to the map. And I was trying to keep track of where the cities were in my head, and I was completely wrong, because Eastern is really like a Southern dominance, and the Southern dominance is kind of like a Southwestern dominance, and the Western dominance is really like a Northwestern dominance, and it's all kind of just a little bit off.
Well, also, the compass rose doesn't have north, south, east, and west. It has their own symbols.
Yeah, it's got the Allomantic symbols.
So maybe the map is actually like this.
I think you're actually right. Yeah, right, you're right. It's fucky. The whole thing's fucky. No. Yeah, but I think maps you can absolutely look at. You can ask me for any of the references, but I think I made the statement to you in a text, and I will make it for anyone at home. This book is A-OK to read both the front and the Ars Arcanum in the back of the book, because it does not, at the very least, the Allomantic table, I should say, in the Ars Arcanum. I haven't gone through and read the terms, but it's just another Allomantic table with, the extra metal that we've learned from the previous book. So it doesn't expand, it adds questions, but it doesn't, really determine anything externally for you.
To anyone who's new to listening to us through the Mistborn series, not through Red Rising, I know I get a little bit intense about spoilers and stuff. And one, that's just kind of how I am. I really enjoy not having things to think about while going forward. When's this going to get revealed? What does this mean? Going forward and trying to piece things together, because I will. If I know something about it, I can't stop that from getting into my mind. But also, for the show, I want to come at it as fresh as possible, because a big part of the show is making predictions and seeing if I'm right. So I know it's a little bit intense.
Yeah. But it's also keeping it honest to the chapters and
that
like
too. Yeah.
knowingly intensely separated from that. We do have an episode coming out in March or April, depending on when we officially launch the other feeds, but of speculative knowledge explaining our not ridiculous, but I think it's ridiculous and it's helpful for experiencing media, but our Team No Hype explanation. So
yeah. I don't think it's unique. I think it's probably pretty common, but we put a name to it and we kind of honor it as much as we can. The Team No Hype. You
know, like around the new Spider-Man movie, of which you have no idea about. With that, we move into Chapter 4, and we open up with, of course, the logbook, as we always do. I'm calling it the logbook. It's a piece of metal, apparently. Maybe.
The slab.
The slab. Anyway, here we've got the first little section. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps I am mad, or jealous, or simply daft. My name is Quan, philosopher, scholar, traitor. I am the one who discovered Elend, and I am the one who first proclaimed him to be the hero of ages. I am the one who started all of this. Mm-hmm. So, we've already talked about it a little bit, but like this is the declaration of who we're listening to, which is interesting, versus the previous logbook, which was kind of kept a secret intentionally from us, as well as the definition of the author of the previous logbook, Elend.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's a whole lot to make of this little chunk other than the fact that now we know for sure who the author is. And I think just knowing that changes the way I approach the rest of it. Because even the first book, I was basically 100% sure that it was Lord Ruler through most of it. But it was still, there was no confirmation. So I didn't have that to lean on as far as context goes, looking at what's being said. So this is, and even in the idea that he was the Lord Ruler, he was clearly someone different than who the Lord Ruler became in that sort of thought process. So there was an air
your
of
assumption
mystery.
was that there was a transformation was your assumption then. Yeah.
Yeah. So this, we know without a doubt who's writing this. So we don't have to put any sort of brain power to like who this person is other than trying to figure out what this person is all about. Like there's still that aspect of it.
Yeah, there's still portions to figure out here, but it's not quite as strict of a discovery as the last story was.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And the fact that we know that it's Quan. We've heard of Quan before. We've talked about him previously in this episode even, that, you know, he had a connection with Elend. He ultimately betrayed him, and, you know, he literally calls himself a traitor within this own section. So there's definitely more to be revealed here, which will be interesting.
Yeah.
To see.
Yeah, it will be.
All right. We jump, of course, from here to Sazed and his perspective here in the Eastern Dominance, wherein he's being investigated, or rather, wherein he's investigating a mysterious death of a man who seized seemingly from an attack from the mist during the day, which is completely against our assumptions of when the mist comes out and everything like that. But Sazed has seen this before, relatively recently.
Interesting and freaky, but I really appreciate that we get Sazed's perspective in this book so far. We get it a couple times in this section, and that makes me really kind of hopeful that we get it going forward. But we also know that sometimes the perspective is kind of a one and done for Branderson. The fact that there's two of them, maybe that means that it won't stop, but I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that it'll continue on because I really like this character. As far as this context goes, this section. Actually, before that, did we make predictions about who would be a perspective in the next book? I feel like we talked about that.
I should have. No.
Maybe we talked about it in, like off air?
I think we might have talked about it in the wrap-up episode a little bit, but it was not a...
Okay. It wasn't an official prediction.
Big point. Yeah.
Okay. I couldn't remember. I don't remember if I said Sazed at all.
I could have. You did.
Okay. Cool. Well, I'll know I could have gotten a drink out of you at that point. But with this, like, actually looking at the text, the mists are going to be a problem, aren't they? Like, they're going to be a real big problem going forward. Like, oh, nothing to worry about. These stories keep the ska happily in their home, scared of going outside, blah, blah, blah. It's fucking bullshit. There's shit going down. Like, this is not good stuff. And the fact that Vin is so cavalier about just being in the mists, she's going to get herself killed, man. Like, she's really going to hurt herself. I feel like a mother from the 60s or something. And that's why I leaned into it that way.
Yeah. No, definitely like a Mad Men era mom.
There's clearly something nefarious happening with the mists, and it's evolving, and we've seen a bunch of different reasons for that to be the case throughout this entire section. And seeing it through Sazed and knowing that he's seen it before, I think is going to be really, really helpful, because we're going to be able to lean on any historical knowledge that he might have going forward. And also, he's just good at deducing things. So I think having him have firsthand experience here, even if he doesn't know anything prior, is going to be really helpful going forward. Yeah.
I think that what's really interesting about Sazed is he has all this perspective that we really haven't gotten. We've gotten lessons from Sazed. We've never gotten the knowledge of Sazed, which is what's really cool too, with like accessing his ferrochemical powers and peeling through his mind, the index of the metal mind that he talks about to like access. It's so cool. It's so neat.
Yeah.
Like it's a whole thing. Yeah. I totally agree. In all concepts with Sazed, I think that it is a brilliant perspective to add, but then on top of that, we have the sort of curiosity about what else could... all the things that Sazed knows, because he's kind of removed from our other immediate characters at the moment. We have this sense of dramatic irony if Sazed figures something out, because he's naturally disconnected and he knows all of these things. So, there's kind of an interesting disconnect between the perspectives there.
Right.
I really appreciate, of course, the reason that we're talking about this investigation in the first place into this spontaneous death from the mists is, Sazed ultimately labors here to give Jed, the man who died from the exposure, some decency by actually burying him when everyone else was afraid to even go near him. And I think this speaks volumes to Sazed as a character.
Yeah, it does. He is really a great person and a wonderful character. He's really well written and he's a good dude. It makes me feel guilty for not trusting him implicitly from the beginning. I don't know, man. Yeah, I feel bad about that. It's my brain, dude. I can't trust people. I can't trust these characters. I can't do it. I don't.
Oh man.
Like, even me saying that I should be trusting them and like knowing that I should trust them, it makes me think that that's what's like, that's the manipulation. Make me feel bad about not trusting him. So maybe I can turn my mind and then it'll fucking turn on me.
Like there's some sort of extra malicious intent there.
Yep.
There's an interesting note here, though, of course, to end kind of the chapter in the discussion, as Sazed is presents a Hada ritual. I think that's probably as close as we'll ever get to saying it properly, but a Hada ritual to the gathered folks of the Eastern Dominance, and that those folks actually feel really abandoned by the Lord Ruler's departure. And this idea of this other religion is super foreign to them. They kind of are like, what? And they have a very interesting reaction. It's sad, but the nature of the faith that's been so deeply ingrained inside of their culture for the last 1,000 years, it's going to take more than just killing God to make them kind of move on, It's so fascinating.
Yeah. They're basically unable to even grasp the idea that religions existed before the Lord ruled. It's going to make for a really uphill battle, especially outside of Luthadel and outside of like the city center where they got firsthand experience of like the resistance and the armies that like fought against the Lord Ruler. They're completely removed from that. So they don't have that context. So why would they just abandon everything that they've been taught? They don't have a reason to. Especially when that's effectively their form of education. Like that is, their education is a religious one. And so what else do they know but the labor of the lords and like the reason that the lords have them labor, and that is for the religion. It's this interesting bureaucracy that is their entire life that is driven from this religious base. So like they're still afraid of the lords' houses that they should be going into to protect themselves from the winter. They're still afraid of all of these different things, and they just don't have the capability of overcoming them right now. They have the capability, they just don't have the capacity. That's a good distinction. Yeah. Right.
Any other thoughts on Chapter 4 and our first dip with Sazed this week?
It was a short one, huh? Yeah, no, that's...
Both
that's
of the Sazed chapters are pretty short, so, yeah.
He's just a succinct dude.
Quick dips in, quick dip out, which I think is a good, it's a good meta thing from Brandon's perspective, because Sazed knows so much. If he wants to try to keep anything a secret, he can't let us live in that head for too long. You know, like,
right. That's a good point.
Yeah. So he's got to just give us windows of time, almost. So with that, we move into Chapter 5. And we have our quote here from the logbook, of course. "And I am the one who betrayed him, for I now know that he must never be allowed to complete his quest." Very short and simple and pretty straightforward. It's Quan serving Elend some looks, being kind of angry.
This seems like it's entirely chronological, and the next sentence after the previous logbook entry, which, I mean, maybe not all of them are like this. I don't think all of them are like butted up next to each other, but it makes me have some hope that everything is chronological, at least, so we can see a progression in story to a certain extent throughout the entire book.
This logbook has a lot less to hide up front, very clearly, because of this chronological nature of it, right? So it feels like the first thing is like, do not trust anything that you read that is not carved into metal. Then he starts to tell the story of like why you should believe and listen to him. And then he starts to tell the story of what's going on and what happened to lead him to this point. So it's kind of, it feels like we are getting a parallel story that is being told chronologically so far.
So far.
So, yeah. I agree with you there. I love how this chapter opens after the logbook with the 3 pages of Vin exploring the city, showing us the changes on the streets that the Ska have flooded in while some of the noblemen have left, that businesses are turning corners and becoming flourishing entities, and that money has made a positive impact in Ska's lives and in street urchins' lives, of whom are robbing the Ska. You know, there's maybe even an increase there potentially because, you know, there's more money floating around. Ska don't necessarily know how to treat money, so there's potentially more pickpockets. It's kind of funny. But it's great scene dressing, and to me shows real growth in the writing between these novels that we kind of talked about and featured earlier. We sort of end this cascade of scene setting with Vin staring into a gown shop, touching her earring, and recalling her mother, the death of her sister, and Reen carrying her out of the house covered in blood.
Yeah. So, a few different things to address there. You mentioned the fact that the street urchins are a lot more apt to pickpocketing. And I think specifically, you mentioned that it's because more people have money. Like, there's just a better chance that you're going to run into somebody that has some money in their pockets to pickpocket. But there's also the fact that they're much less likely to run into very, very serious punishment for getting caught. Because previously, the only people that would have money on them would be the very wealthy and powerful, who could bring down the hammer of the law on you if they caught you. So I think Vin mentions that like only the boldest of the street urchins would really try that at all. So there's that. And I mean, yes, also the Ska just don't know necessarily how to hold their money. You'd think they'd be a lot more sort of protective of it, having never had it before. But once you kind of fall out of that honeymoon phase of having coins, maybe it falls into a little bit more normality without being too absurd with the amount of money that you have on you. I don't know.
Tyrannical dictatorship being replaced with kind of a capitalistic system is interesting, right? Like, these people have never had to provide for their own livelihood. They've always been they've been given shitty food, but they've still been given food. They've been given lodging, and now they're being basically given an allowance on top of that. It's interesting. It's a shift for sure. And as such, the street urchins are kind of taking advantage of that shift.
And there's also what Vin mentioned, there's a lot less artistry that goes into like trying to draw people's attention. It's more shouting and more just trying to bark at people to get their attention for like what you're selling. Whereas before, you had to really stand out and be artistic, and there were dances and displays going on to draw the people, to draw the attention of the people that had money in these crowded streets. And now it's everybody has money, so get the most number of people to your stand. So that's a really interesting shift as well. So that was kind of cool to see described. Shifting to Vin herself, she mentions her earring. She's touching it. She's thinking about it, all of that. Have we had enough description before this to know that it was made of bronze? Or is that new information? I'm still like operating under the assumption that this is ferrochemical in nature.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's new information. I think it's an extension of information that we knew.
Okay.
That it's made out of bronze.
Interesting. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it interesting?
It's giving me more, like, it's giving more solid, like, clues into thinking that the way I'm thinking about this is correct. Who knows? But that's where my brain's going. Bronze is internal, yes?
Yeah. Yes. Internal pushing metal.
So it lines up.
Makes sense to me. Yeah, it's interesting. Mm-hmm. The scene with the folks from the Church of the Survivors hunting, I think, these are folks who have kind of lost their way in their faith, searching for it in Kelsier's heir apparent, Vin. Obviously the Church of the Survivors, this thing that sprung up after Kelsier's death as this martyr for the Ska and for society at large. And they're seeking Vin as sort of their new priest, and not priest, but new figure in a way, because obviously one of them is a priest seeking blessings and things like that. It's just like another hand-me-down from Kelsier, another remnant of the legacy that he hadn't really anticipated. And I think it's just kind of sad and unfortunate that that's like just hefted onto Vin. What'd you make of it? What do you think?
I guess you could see it as sad or unfortunate to be kind of put onto her, but at the same time, this is exactly the situation that Kelsier was aiming for, like becoming a messiah of sorts. And maybe he didn't expect the actual congregations or churches to pop up, or for Vin to be so tied to it. But like, he couldn't have thought that she was going to be entirely like separate from that, knowing how powerful she is and how critical she was to the plan in general. And frankly, I think Vin should be leaning more into this. I know that's kind of a departure from her personality, but she could really be using this situation as a figurehead. Want it or not, she's a figurehead in this church. So using that as a platform to motivate people to act in a way that honors Kelsier's memory and what he was actually like trying to do could be incredibly useful to the cause in general. Like, yes, they have created a kingdom on top of the Lord Ruler's like ruins, but they still have to get people on board with it. And having that sort of seed within the Ska community, I think would go a long way. And being that connected to it, I think she's kind of squandering that opportunity.
Yeah. And like she could take that moment, but that's never been her personality, right? No. Like it's never been who she is. So
I agree. Yeah. It would have been weird for her to do it, but I think that would have been the right move.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
Like it wouldn't have made sense for her to do that, but I think that's the way that she should be aiming to go in the future.
Yeah. She absolutely could be taking aggressive isn't the right word, but she could be taking a stance for, she could be taking advantage of the situation she's presented with, which she often does as a thief. So, it's not that far of a stretch to say she might do something like that. So we finally arrive at the purpose of Vin's venture out into town, that of finding a wolfhound. The dog vetter doesn't want to sell her one, of course. He wants to instead give her something cute, like a little, I think he says something like a little Barbie or something like that. She quickly finds her way to the wolfhound, kills it with a quick blow to the head, takes the leash that was there to walk a dog away, and instead ties its legs together so that she can bring it back to Orsur, so that he can become the dog. This is a brutal fucking scene for a book, regardless. Brandon, you introduced us to a dog, and before petting it, you killed it.
She flared pewter first.
Well, right. And that's just to, make sure that it dies. I understand, the ruthless efficiency. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But
yeah. No, I'm just highlighting that fact a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is brutal. You're right. And it's...
Killing a dog is not YA.
At least she didn't walk it home.
Yeah, right.
And then kill it. Like, at least she had to have the burden of carrying a dead dog around. I feel like it would have been worse to like make it walk itself.
Walked it home. Yeah, you're right. But it was not pleasant to have to kill that in front of him.
No.
There's almost no way that the scene works out well.
I think the choice is really interesting, though.
Yeah.
Like, I know and I understand that she'll need Orsur to be at least a little bit physically formidable if something were to go down, just in case, in a pinch.
Yeah.
But it seems like the primary goal is for him to be a spy and for people to let their guard down and like speak around him candidly. So why not be something a little bit cuter? Like not something so cute that people are fawning over it constantly, but like just a normal looking dog, not a snarling, what's it called? A wolfhound? Like, it's gonna be intimidating and people are gonna be on guard just in its presence. It feels like they could have gone a little bit more subtle with the choice in dog.
There's a question of, to your point, I think I agree with you. I don't think the rules of the Kandra have been so well defined that they could change shape that dramatically. Like, imagine if a Kandra was a cat or like a bird. Like, that is dramatically different than wearing the bones of a person or like a bigger dog. I don't know that we've had that defined yet well enough, you know? Can they shrink? Like, so to your point, like a small
he's got to
dog,
be bigger. He's got to be big enough to like not
a big enough dog so that he actually fits and can wear the bone. That's just a thought. That's not a guaranteed. It's just a, you know.
That makes sense. Again, because she does explicitly go for the biggest one and then realizes that it's kind of like aggressive.
I'm not saying it's factual.
I think.
Yes, right. But I think she also sees that as a positive because, like, she is the guard of the king, right? And she sees that as, like, I've got me and a big dog, and they're going to assume that I just have a big dog as my pet. Turns out it's a Kandra. But it was also a dog.
Dogdra.
Yeah. Now it's just brutal. Punching the dog in the head will forever live with me as, like, one of the craziest things that Brandon Sanderson has done in the books that I've read. Like,
initially, the first time I read it, I thought she did it to knock it unconscious so she could bring it back without having to deal with it being obstinate. Like, I don't know if I missed it or if it doesn't explicitly say it. I can't recall. But it didn't feel to me that she killed it right then and there. It felt to me that she like just knocked it unconscious and then brought it back. Subsequent reads. Yeah, no, she just fucking punched it to death.
She just fucking punched in the brain. No bueno. Yeah, I get that.
I didn't know where it was going, so I didn't consider the idea that she was just going to kill it in the kennel. You know?
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, God. We jump from the delicious picture of a Kandra eating the dog
while not wanting to
one of Vin receiving a letter with a potential new metal in it. He does not want to, Orsur does not want to consume this dog, like, is very against it. He also states that, he also does say, I forgot this, he does say that they can't kill a man, like he can't kill men, because it...
Oh, I missed that entirely.
Yeah, there's a note that he can't kill someone just to eat them, so, like, he can't just... kill to consume.
Oh, so he can't consume somebody that he killed?
No, he
can't. Can he kill somebody in general?
I don't think they can kill. Pretty sure that's a rule. Which chapter are we in? 5, right? Yeah. So I'm pretty sure it's actually in chapter 2 that it said earlier, but here Vin says, just to clarify, I'm not going to kill for you, Kandra, and even if I did kill someone, I wouldn't let you eat them. Plus, this will be more inconspicuous. So, there is a note earlier, I know, that says specifically he can't kill. But it is a question of kill and defense, kill, otherwise. Unsegudo. It's definitely in chapter 2. Chapter
2.
Okay, here's what it says. The contract states that I cannot be forced to kill men.
So he is able.
Cannot be forced.
But he doesn't have to follow an order to kill someone.
Correct. Yep. So Kandra cannot be assassins.
Right.
If you want to think about it that way.
Which...
It's a decent delineation.
Makes sense. They can be, as long as they decide to go along with it, but they can't be like compelled to under breach of contract.
And Orsur needs to be compelled to do literally anything. So
that Orsur is kind of a surly bastard.
It's a fair point. Hey, you kind of feel like Vin's like, fuck you, dude. Just do it. Like, you knew what I was implying. You knew, like, why are you being such a dick?
Yep.
Yeah. Especially because he was so kind of like, he was kind of kind as Renew. It's a very like different timbre with
okay. I can understand the idea of him not wanting to become a dog if other Kandra can like sense him. He's like, I don't want to get caught like being a dog. It's demeaning. They're going to make fun of me at the Kandra meetups. Like,
I mean, you're not wrong. It's just funny. It's he literally does say something to the effect of like, I am a man. What do you mean? And yeah. Oh, the wolfhound.
Or I wonder if there's like always a lingering aspect to anybody that they've like consumed.
They get the memories. We talked about that. They get the memories.
So he's always going to have the dog memories.
He's going to have dog memories.
He's always going to have the memory of Vin punching him to death in the head.
Oh. That could explain some resentment, maybe.
Oh, no.
No, it's interesting, for sure. Mm-hmm. So, as we were saying, we got interrupted by this idea of Kandra killing men, dog, etc. But another part that happens here is Vin receiving a letter with a potential new metal in it, that of Duralumin from Tarion, a master allomantic metalsmith. This is really interesting as it is apparently an alloy of aluminum. How does this have your brain turning regarding allomantic theory?
Is how I pronounced it. Duralumin.
Yep.
Duralumin.
I called it Duralumin, which is dumb. It should be
Duralumin.
Duralumin.
Also works if you're pronouncing aluminum as aluminium, which for most of the world is correct. We know so I'm going to kind of give my perspective on this initially, and then we get more context later. So like my initial thoughts are like what I'm going to say right away. Aluminum isn't known to be allomantic in general. At least like we don't know that yet. And working under that understanding, I was curious if it was something like she was trying to figure out a different delivery system for different metals. Like she was trying to deliver copper in a specific way as an alloy to aluminum somehow. Or maybe it was a way of hiding her metals from like prying eyes, something like that. But it seems to be more of an offensive play, trying to like figure out the alloy of the aluminum that she was forced to burn to like deplete all of her iron or all of her metal reserves. That makes more sense, but I'm still curious how she's going to like force people to take and burn it. Like the Steel Inquisitors were kind of a crazy, ridiculous force, and like that seemed like the only way to actually force somebody to do something like that. I don't know.
But we learned later that aluminum is an allomantic metal.
Do we? Did we
do.
That?
It's actually addressed specifically in this section. It is specifically what you're talking about. It was a secret of the Steel Ministry. We can talk about this a little bit more strictly when we get to the section, but it is specifically a metal that was kept secret by the Steel Ministry because it could strip an allomancer of their powers, their abilities, their metals inside of their stomach. So It is allomantic. It just has a seemingly counter allomantic effect.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't putting that into the same category, but you're right. Yep.
So it is considered a metal.
Yep.
An allomantic metal, because when burned, it has an effect. Unlike like sickness, which is like burning a bad metal. This is clearing. It is a known point. Known variable.
At this point, I wonder if there are very obscure alloys of basically any metal that might have some weird obscure power. Like if Vin gets a hold of bananas. If bananas exist in this world, but they're like way off and nobody has them, and she gets a banana and eats a banana and has like fucking crazy powers, something. I don't know. She can control lights. I don't know what's up.
I think that's what's so fun about this. Go ahead.
So specifically, I'm bringing up bananas because I had this thought earlier, and I don't know if I brought it up to you or not. I think I might have. I think I texted this to you. Bananas are very, very high in potassium, and potassium is a metal. Can she just fling bananas all over the place?
That's a great question on trace metals and things, and how much you need to actually push on something for it to be like pushable.
I mean, maybe most people can't, but Vin.
I mean, Vin can detect things that other people can't detect. I bet Vin would be a banana slinger for sure,
or just like banana summoner.
There's always
like she does
potassium
with
in the banana stand.
Copper. She does it with Spook's copper mug.
Yeah.
She could do that with bananas.
I'm so pissed you didn't hear my joke.
Oh, I didn't.
There's always potassium in the banana stand. Like pulling it. Like
there's always metal in the banana stand.
Yeah, there's always metal in the banana stand, Finn. I thought of it and I was like, that is so funny. And I just needed to narrator. It was not that funny, but like also
I'm just imagining Vin being like a pew, pew.
Banana
I know why. I was making memes, and I did that for one of them. I don't know if that ever got published. I don't think it did.
No, I haven't shared it yet.
Banana slinging.
Banana slanger. It's so ridiculous. But Allomancy theory, like it leads to interesting questions, like you're saying, of like how many minor alloys are there. I think Elend even mentioned something along the lines of, in this chapter, of like, could there be multiple alloys to one core metal? Could there be like multiple that are useful?
Also, is pure aluminum then something else?
Pure aluminum is the burn your stomach.
No, that was needed to find the right alloy for it.
That's duralumin. That is the right alloy.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we don't know what it actually does yet. Okay.
Correct.
Here we go. Okay.
We don't know what duralumin does.
Now I understand. I was really confused with like the entire thing, because she mentions not getting a headache, but she doesn't mention like
anything happening, because she doesn't know what's going
happening. Okay.
Yeah. We don't know at this point what it does.
I thought they were trying to find the alloy that the Steel Ministry used to burn people's.
No. That is aluminum.
I thought they were trying to. Okay. Now I'm understanding.
Aluminum is the core.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So aluminum is a metal on the table.
Okay.
Duralumin is an alloy potentially on the table, but we don't know its ability.
Right. And we also know that it was number 5 out of 40 possible.
Yep. And she didn't get sick this time. She got sick from the previous 4 for 2 days a pop for just burning a metal. So,
yeah.
Allomancy theory is a lot of fun for this exact reason of like, it's like, oh, fuck, I've got this entire other curiosity that's almost scientific about this magic system. So, getting back to the rest of this chapter, because there's so much left to cover here, Dachshund returns from the north, and we learn of the tensions between him and Elend, that they get along, but not perfectly well compared to the rest of the crew. They're almost at odds with each other, which is a different turn from what we've seen with everyone else, because potentially a lot of Dachshund's history, like we discussed previously in the infamous episode 7 that was historically long, and all the various notes that could happen there, we can see that kind of manifesting in their relationships as they discuss each other in the way that they kind of butt heads. And incorporating Elend into the crew has led to tensions directly with him, but it's necessary, being that Elend is in charge of everything, and Dachshund is just such a good executive assistant, as Lindsay said.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head, though, like already. Like, why are these tensions here? And it's because Dachshund has this ska background that was so horribly oppressed on a personal level from people that were in Elend's position. It's not easy to just drop that. Even if you understand that Elend isn't like that, it's still maybe not right to hold on to that resentment, but completely understandable. So I think we'll see a progression between them in their relationship and how they interact with each other going forward. But I think it's just still high tensions. He was Kelsier's right hand, who presumably held a lot of the same opinions on the noble class as Kelsier did, who was pretty intense, you know? So
yeah,
it'll take some time, I think.
It is going to take some time, and I think that it's nice to have some like intergroup tension, because this wasn't really a thing before. It kind of was, because Vin didn't know whether to trust anyone, but this is kind of a nice, I say this from a meta perspective, it's a nice thing to like see a little bit of friction and not everything go so well. Otherwise, it's just like, this is all too easy to some degree. And this makes base sense with Elend and Dachshund's characters. Like, they occupy similar spaces in terms of getting shit done. So, yeah. Elend is almost like a fusion of Dachshund and Ham, in a way, if you want to think about it that way.
Yeah, entirely.
So, moving back to something that we've already talked a little bit about, what did you think of Vin and Elend's conversation revolving around our sword, the contract, and kind of his general attitude? So, just want to make sure we didn't miss anything. We're just adding Elend's perspective into the equation. And he talks about Tensoon specifically as a reference point.
Right. I think this is the point where we realize that, or where it's revealed that these contracts aren't ironclad. They can be broken. And ironclad in sort of the way that I'm thinking about sort of demonic pacts, or like devilish pacts. And it's more about personal consequences for breaking them. I don't know what to make of it other than that. But Vin makes a really good point here. Like, knowing that they don't want to break that pact makes it suck way more when they actually do. I don't know. I don't recall exactly what Elend said about Tensoon. I'd have to go back and look. I can't recall.
Yeah. So I think the conversation with Tensoon is really one of sort of it's just a small note. It's that Elend's experience is really with Tensoon predominantly as like the House Kandra for the Venture House, and it's not much more than I understand what that contract was, and they're comparing the two, and they're like, well, this is a House Kandra, you had him for years, blah blah. He was indebted to the house, so he followed a specific rule set, versus Orsur is kind of under this very different rule set, which is an inherited contract from Kelsier, of which he feels indebted more to Kelsier than he does Vin, even though Vin is now the holder of the agreement and contract. So it is an interesting kind of precedent to have and to try to follow.
And Kelsier bought that contract too, or paid for it.
Yeah, we learned that Kandra at the end of the last book are expensive and paid in Atium, specifically. Yep.
Okay. So what does he do with the Atium?
Good question. No answer as of yet. What does he do with the Atium, PJ? I don't know.
Does he use that for the shape-shifting?
Maybe. Elend, Vin, and this new empire are all clouded by the legacy of Kelsier, which we've talked about a couple of times, and the imprint that he's left on society. It's so clear throughout this chapter between Elend's reflections, the people in the street addressing Vin as Lady Heir, and all of the rest. The Kelsier is stamped all over this fucking part so far. Yeah. Obviously, the title of the thing is Heir of the Survivor. So, like, this is, as I said, it's better, I think, to think of it as heirs of the survivor, not heir, but...
Right. But, I mean, I don't really see how it would be possible to not have his influence everywhere.
Yeah,
like, right. It's exactly what he was going for, and it's how he built the entire thing. Like, how he built his plan was to become a martyr and basically a messiah. I don't know what to say. Like, that's exactly what he was going for. So they have to live with the consequences of that. But it's what worked. It's what rallied everybody around the cause, so it was necessary either way.
Yeah, I think that is you're right, there's no way that you can't feel his influence everywhere, and there's no way that there's any way that they're going to be able to stretch out of that immediately. It's only been a year, and the impact of his martyrdom is widespread.
But as far, like, I also think it would be kind of a slap in the face to the resistance that built themselves around Kelsier and fought for Kelsier to just drop his influence entirely after the fact. Like, they were fighting for him before he died, and then more were fighting for him after he died. And to just say, like, he died, we're taking the spot, and like his influence is no more. It just ushered out the reign of the Lord ruler. Like, I think that would suck. You know? I think you need his influence in order to be genuine to the cause. And that's hyperbolic. I know that's a hyperbolic way to look at it, but you know what I mean?
I totally get it. I totally get it. I think that I don't feel like you're reaching that far. You're reaching, but you're not reaching that far. I understand.
I'm intentionally being a little bit over the top, but I don't think it's that bad, that much of a reach.
Cool. Moving on from that, I just want to quote something that's within this section as well, which I think is a good quote. I think that we didn't actually spend enough time in the first book quoting Brandon Sanderson that much versus the amount of time that we did with Pierce Brown and whatnot. Some of that's because I think Brandon Sanderson he's trying to be very plain. Like, it's plain and it's good. He is very communicative directly with a lot of his information. But he still has highlights and lowlights and language and things like that. But I want to highlight this one because I love it. It's very close to a quote that I have on my fucking wall, so it feels like it's very relevant. But good men don't need to become legends. They do what's right anyway, which is astonishingly similar to Marcus Aurelius's stop debating what a good man should be and be one.
Yeah, so I was going to mention this if you hadn't.
Yeah.
The very, very stoic vibes off of this book in general. And this comes earlier, like even the first logbook entry of I write these words in steel, for anything not set in metal cannot be trusted. Even that gives that sort of vibe, not necessarily to the same like explicit extent, but it feels stoic in nature.
Sure. Ironclad in its own way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
It sort of evokes the idea of outwardly being exactly who you are.
Right.
Be permanent.
Yeah, and especially that first phrase, you're right. That is very much like your impact is permanent and kind of solidifying yourself in something is important. That's a good read on that. I think that this book, ultimately, I think that you've read and kind of predicted well as far as what we've seen, it kind of being like a political intrigue. There's definitely a lot of that inside of this so far, in addition to some like questions and some kind of lingering things in the background. But I think that sentiment matches well, and I think that then again, like Brandon Sanderson feels like he has maybe enough underneath him to be a little bit more confident with some of these things, to be a little bit more brazen with statements like this about character and moments and things like this. And I think that's ultimately, I think it's a good thing, and I think that comes out more in this novel than it does in Mistborn.
I think you're right. Entirely.
Yeah.
You mentioned us not quoting Brandon Sanderson as much as we quoted Pierce Brown during like the Red Rising series. I don't know if we quoted Pierce Brown so much as far as like really standout quotes in the first book.
True. Similarly. Yeah.
There
were a couple, but not that many.
There were a couple, sure. Yeah.
In the same way that there were a couple in the previous book. Like, we did call out a handful, but it feels like similarly they're growing as authors. They have similar starting points, similar trajectories. It lines up pretty cleanly and concisely between the two of them.
For sure.
So, yeah. Makes sense. So, I just want to make sure like that people understand I like Brandon Sanderson's writing. It's just that all of it is so consistent and persistent. It's great. And those moments where he just pops up above that sort of plain is in a non-negative way. Like, he pops up above that like explanation boundary that he lives in a lot of the time. It's fantastic. And he's already done that a couple of times inside of the first 80 pages of this book. So, and he did a lot at the end of the first book. So we did quote a couple of those descriptions and whatnot. So we've already talked about this a little bit, but we get a backstory on aluminum. Right? We talked about this kind of like element of aluminum. This is where we get it, is at the end of the chapter, saying that this was a well-kept secret by the ministry that completely removed the reserves of an Allomancer when burned. Vin burns the new alloy, and thankfully for her sake, nothing happens as far as a headache goes, but also she doesn't know what's happening when she burns it.
Right. So
throws up questions.
Now understanding that that alloy is different than pure aluminum. I don't know what I was thinking. Brain was crossed a little bit. I wish I had more time to like go back and think about, I don't know, speculate on what it could be. I don't know what it could mean. How maybe it's a focus. Could it be used as sort of a magnification of other metals? Like if she were to try to burn pewter while also burning duralumin, would that intensify the effects of the pewter? That could, like, I could see that as being an inverse of completely burning.
The inverse of getting rid of is strengthen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
Because I don't think you can generate it. That doesn't seem consistent with the world.
Yeah, generating metals inside of you would be odd.
Unless it could be used as sort of a catch-all. Yeah. So if you have if you're already burning pewter, if you could just kind of extend that burn to the aluminum storage as kind of a reserve of whatever. It feels like that ability would be reserved for something much more rare and precious, though. Like aluminum's a very common metal. And it feels like that would be discovered early on and would be like well used by Mistborn.
I would agree. That would be interesting, but it would also be something that the Lord Ruler might have kept under wraps intentionally, which is kind of what happened with aluminum. So maybe there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Cool. Other thoughts on Chapter 5?
No, I think that's pretty much everything.
Cool. With that, we move into Chapter 6. We start off with the logbook, of course, here. Page 60, which is Elend posts the well, and kind of the sort of thoughts that he might be violent. I'll read that here. I write this record now, pounding it into a new metal slab, because I am afraid. Afraid for myself, yes, I admit to being human. If Elend does return from the Well of Ascension, I am certain that my death will be one of his first objectives. He is not an evil man, but he is a ruthless one. That is, I think, a product of what he has been through. So, this is an interesting read.
It is. The thing that stuck out to me was the terminology used of pounding this into the metal slab. That's the first time this is mentioned here in this book. Mm-hmm. Like, it's mentioned that he's writing it in metal. But that specific terminology, I feel like, was used in Mistborn from Elend's perspective, talking about... What's his name?
Rashek?
No, other guy.
Quan.
I feel like he mentions Quan striking things into metal slabs and writing in metal during this scene from his perspective in the logbooks in Mistborn. And I might be going crazy, but I feel like that's the case. Because I think we've talked about this. Do you remember that?
Yes. I don't think it's as closely related as you think it is. Okay. I'll give you that. Yeah.
That's fair. It just evokes that memory.
Yeah, it feels like a parallel. So I understand. That makes sense to me.
So this is right before he goes into he's already gone into the well, correct?
Yep.
Has not come out yet.
We don't know that yet. This is actually Elend is away from this process, or rather, excuse me, Quan is away from this process. He's not with Elend while all this is going on. He's not with him. Oh, he's not traveling with him.
So he's waiting for the return from the quest, not like sitting at the at the outskirts of the well.
Correct. He's not actually going on the journey with him because he betrayed him beforehand, and that's.
I thought my entire understanding was that he betrayed him during the journey.
No.
Okay.
Well, he may have betrayed him. Okay. He betrayed
because Elend knew about the betrayal right away.
Yes.
And I felt like he was already on the
while
road.
The journey was going. But Quan was not a part of the party. It was information that was given to them while they were journeying.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. Now I've got to think more.
Yeah.
Now I've got to reapproach a lot of stuff going forward because I was under the impression that he was like a party member the entire time.
No. He's not a party member. He was just the first person to catch on and promote Elend as the dude, the guy. The dude, the guy. I love this sparring match that we get in Chapter 6 between Ham and Vin, especially from the third-party perspective of Elend. It's a nice little view into the world, thinking through his lens and the stresses of being king, and kind of seeing this fight.
Yeah. So what I really liked about this perspective in this sparring match was the fact that this allowed, or at least maybe not allowed, but this gave Brandon Sanderson the opportunity to showcase his ability to talk about fight scenes in not a very dry, choreography kind of way, and sort of let it be a little bit more flowery, which is exactly what you would expect from Elend and from any sort of nobleman to like be able to describe the flourishes of the moves as opposed to just the matter of fact, like actions being taken. So I thought that was pretty cool. And maybe that's just the perspective, just a function of the perspective that we're in, or if it's growth of Brandon Sanderson as a writer and being able to combine those ways of writing. But I appreciated it either way.
I think it's really interesting because it imparts perspective as opposed to the dry perspective, like you're saying. It imparts what Elend understands of Allomancy as opposed to the strict laws and rules of Allomancy. And again, it's just pewter. We're not seeing a whole lot more than just pewter, but it's still interesting because we're given kind of the outside-in perspective from someone who's not even a misting, who doesn't understand how metals work in burn in theory, like only understands in theory, I guess. Yeah, it is a fun little. It's a fun little, it's good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Yeah. And like you said, the flowery language also matches Elend's characteristic. Like that matches his sort of approach to the world. So I get that. And then, Club shows up. The general of Elend's military forces in the middle of this fight, basically while they're conversing and downstairs the duel is kind of going on, or around them the duel is going on. He basically reports that the army isn't doing well considering the seeming impending doom of the invading force knocking at the door. He's much more buddy-buddy with Elend than Dachshund was previously, which is nice to see. But we get Clubs. Clubs is back.
So, I mean, yeah, he mentioned something along the lines of needing more than a year to train an army entirely.
Right.
Basically says he doesn't even consider them an army at this point because they haven't been trained properly. Needs more time, which is a pretty reasonable thing to say in a situation and in their, like, in the army's situation. But he is getting pretty buddy-buddy, but at the same time, he's still the gruff old man that we, like, came to know in the first book.
Which is something that Spook points out as well. Is like he's still like just my old uncle Clubs. And he like calls him like a grudge.
Old. He just is kind of a curmudgeon.
Yeah, right. He's older, and I think on top of that, you add in like the way that they described his face is kind of like warped a little bit and like aged, which is an uncommon thing for Ska because we know that they die earlier rather than later. You can kind of see where that comes in as a descriptor versus a lot of other Ska. Like Menace was old at like 45, almost 50, right? So,
yeah, that's true.
Clubs is similarly aged, but an artisan, which is interesting. So, after placing some bets on Vinnerham and who's going to win the fight, which I think is a lot of fun, Spook also appears with a crazy beard for a brief conversation. And while he's mostly shed his Eastern dialect, he does obviously open up with kind of that signature lingo. He brings back bad news from the West, of course. It does appear that the rumors of the Atium supply are what is attracting everyone to Luthadel and the Central Dominance in general. Breeze is missing within all of this as well, and not a word of his actions making their way back. They're it almost sounds like they're afraid that he's dead.
Right. First and foremost, love the fact that they're taking bets on this. Like, that is exactly what I would expect from the crew.
Yeah.
Is to, like, friendly bet.
Fuck yeah. Bringing Elend into it, too, is such, like, a heartwarming, like, little, it's like, you're a part of it.
And Spook is a welcome sight, even if he does have a really shitty beard. I don't know. It ushers in a very, very fun scene while still kind of giving the weight of the Breeze sort of speculation.
Yeah.
But we don't linger on that, which I'm okay with right now.
Yeah. Don't want to focus on that too much. It's just an interesting note inside of the whole thing. I really like, we mentioned this just a moment ago, but Spook also calls Clubs Uncle Grumbles, which is just like a great little bit, like it's just enough of an insult, but just heartwarming enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's nice. And we get a sense of why like everyone's drawn here and why Set is Ashweather Set that we talked about earlier, why potentially why Straf is here to begin with to like come back and claim that there might be other people contending for the throne. So Vin dispatches Ham in a well-executed flourish, jumping over the man and knocking him over in a tizzy. Nothing crazy, but Ham does request some water afterwards, and the whole ensuing scene is funny and reminiscent of the cruise in the old days. There's just so many different moments of like pulling and pushing and doing fucking shit around the room, pulling the cup, like you'd mentioned earlier, over to give Spook a drink, and some like fun back and forth between like Vin and Spook being cool with each other, which is good, post their sort of near-miss relationship, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. And it seems like Elend isn't aware of that. Right?
No, he's
not aware of it at all.
Yeah, but we are. We get the dramatic irony.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like kind of cluing into it, but not really. I don't know. Mm-hmm. We're in his perspective, and he makes mention of it internally, but kind of in passing. I really appreciated that the fact that we got a little bit more tangible understanding of Pewter, and how we're not necessarily understanding. We had all the information we needed to have for this, but the walking us through the application of the fact that these metals have the power is stored in the metal, not the person. So it doesn't matter the size of the person using the metals, they're still going to give the same amount of power. So the fact that Vin is such a small person, she has that ability to like jump super high with Pewter, to the point where most people assume that she's using iron or steel or whatever. Which one's which? Fuck.
She's pulling, so that's iron, steel pushing.
Or pushing. I think they assumed she was iron pushing off the ground. Pushing. To jump.
Oh yes, yeah, that is the assumption, but at the same time, it's instead communicated that is actually Pewter, because she's only launching a couple of feet, and there's no metal. And
because she's small, it affects her so much more than it would affect Ham.
And this is something that we talked about with Lindsay, right? Is like the benefit of being like a small Pewter user, right? Is like this extra step, this extra like little bit of it's good,
super cool.
It's definitely something. I appreciate that small bit of perspective where we get like her being so good and proficient at using Pewter and kind of winning this fight, and then in post being like still exhausted, still like beaten down from the fight, and like, you know, tired. Not exhausted, it's a little bit much, but you know, she's slinging Gatorade around and like drinks and shit like that, like pouring, you know, basically you can imagine like a post game basically kind of mood going on. You know, we're not taking a Gatorade tub and like dunking it on someone, but you know, picking up the copper and then being like, fuck this, and pouring it into Spook's cup. And I don't know, I just imagine that kind of like fun, friendly attitude, which is what we get from the crew here, you know, in general.
Yeah.
We cut from that warm and fuzzy feeling with the crew to an Orser covered in fur and looking an awful lot like a fucking wolfhound. They take off to end the chapter with a run through the city. I love, he's got like this small rebut here that I just want to bring up. I think it's on page 68. One second here. Give me time. So it's just like this, it's this moment of where he's like repeating himself, right? So like Vin says, "Is that why making this body took you so much longer than you said?" He says, "No, mistress," or Sir said, "The hair. I'm sorry I didn't warn you. Placing fur like this takes a great deal of precision and effort. Actually, you did mention it." And it's like, well, it's just so fucking much that I couldn't think about it further than that. Like, yeah.
I thought it was fucking hilarious how this scene went. And I also really appreciated the fact that Branderson took the time to explain the mechanics of the Kandra enough to know that like they have a little bit of sort of improvisation that they can do when like imitating somebody's body. It's not a one-to-one thing. They can like maybe fuck with the vocal cords a little bit so he can talk. Like it doesn't give the like hardcore outline of exactly how it works, but it does let us know that there is an internal logic to all this and how it works. And I mean, you know me, I appreciate shit like that.
Yeah, there's a logic to the system, which makes sense. With that, we move into our final chapter of the week, Chapter 7. It's a short one, so we are almost done here, but we kick it off with a little logbook entry, of course, like we do. It's great, though. I appreciate the logbook entries in the second book, personally. It's very different than the logbooks in the first, so I am also afraid, however, that all I have known, that my story will be forgotten. I'm afraid for the world that is to come, afraid my plans will fail, afraid of a doom even worse than that of the deepness. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. So I read those as entirely connected comments, not as like separate
sentences,
separate things that he's afraid of. I felt like that was one singular comment about like what he's afraid of, and that's like,
sure,
I don't know, the loss of knowledge and his way of life. So I don't know. Seeing that as worse than the deepness itself, I think makes sense, especially from Sazed's perspective of like his entire like being, his entire life has been dedicated to basically going against the grain and doing everything that he can to make sure these things aren't lost forever. So they come from the same ilk. I don't know. I want more. Of
Good news, you'll get more. That's kind of the name of the game in the story. So you're going to get more. We're reading this book fairly fast, to be honest. Like this is the longest book in the trilogy, and we are reading it as fast as we will read the last book. The same number of episodes, which is crazy. So there could be another episode in here, but I decided to just keep it fast because I think it's better for the pacing of the show. But yeah. So get through a lot really quickly. We've got a couple of like this week, we've got a couple of like 75 to 80 page weeks. So, but cover a lot of ground. I think we've done well. We hop back over to Sazed to him fulfilling what he believed would be the place of the Terracemen after the collapse, that of being a teacher. While he does have some students that appreciate him, he feels like he's much more of a bother than anything else. He's kind of invasive into their lives, and it's interesting too that Sazed feels drawn away from his goal as an instructor and towards that of this other investigation. His curiosity seems almost insatiable despite everything that he knows, which is such an interesting place for a character to be caught in, because it leaves this sort of yearning for something more despite a clearly fulfilling profession right there in front of them. Yeah. Like so many people, you know?
The way I read it was that like being an instructor and being a teacher is a duty and B, a necessity, because like he has a desire to learn more and a desire to like be curious and just explore in general. But being a teacher is what allows that exploration and that learning to not be in vain. His entire being is preserving, like he's a keeper, and as a keeper he is like keeping all of this information, and the goal would be to spread it and make sure that this information doesn't die with him. So like that's his duty as a person, but that doesn't mean it has to be his dream job. You know, it can be both. He can want to explore and want to learn, but have a compulsion and he needs to teach it, or it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that fits. Like it's a dichotomy of character, right? Because like you want to absorb more knowledge so that you can share, but at the same time, like he's now in the mode that he should be sharing, and instead he's like, I still want more knowledge.
Time.
Yeah,
he doesn't. He doesn't want to take the time to share it.
Yeah, which is so interesting and shitty, but also totally in line with someone who's only taken in knowledge their whole life. Right. He's searching to take in still. That's the nature of the keepers. Like they're preserving and taking in. They're not the ones meant, well, they likely are, and they probably should be, but he's never been trained in the like validation of disseminating information. That's not been his goal. It's been retaining, gaining forever. So, yeah. As he's going about these contemplations, of course, one of the Ska runs up to Sazed, claiming that the Lord Ruler has returned. When Sazed goes to inspect, he finds that it isn't, of course, the Lord Ruler, but a black-robed Steel Inquisitor. Marsh comes with the news. The conventicle of Saren is empty, and that means they must go inspect it. There are documents there. It's a library. There's all kinds of things. that are there that Sazed absolutely wants to see because they've been hidden from the Terrace people for generations. Marsh also bears other grave news that the Lord Ruler was merely a cog, merely a delay, and with him gone, there is little time remaining to whatever is going to happen. They pack up and head out for the conventicle to end this week's reading.
Mm-hmm. The Lord Ruler warned them, you know? He was pretty upfront about it.
Yeah.
But what's interesting to me about this, and like we'll get into the specifics of the content, but what's interesting to me is that Marsh was mistaken for the Lord Ruler.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just out of ignorance for like what the Lord Ruler was or what the Steel Inquisitors in general look like, but they didn't look similar. So like, where are those stories coming from? And like, has Sazed not spread that information yet to anybody of like what happened recently and what they looked like and what they were? Like, I don't understand how
that's
that was that was a mistaken identity.
So I think this raises an interesting question about the book, The Final Empire, right? I think this is a good kind of topic of conversation. There's a point here where this leads me to believe that the Inquisitors weren't just the of the Lord Ruler's will so much. They were also literally appearing to be him in these moments, in these public moments. And not so much that they were just enforcers of the will, but they were, because of their presence and everything else, I believe that a lot of the Scar are so mal-educated that they didn't understand that this wasn't the Lord Ruler. And so he could be 20 places at once in theory with his Inquisitors because no one saw him. He was also within the cart. Like, he was never physically seen or present. Some people probably do know, but it's an interesting, stepping stone. I don't think it's foolproof. I don't think that idea is complete, but
clearly it worked well enough.
Yeah, clearly it was, enough of a guise that it succeeded. Yeah.
So Marsh mentioning that the conventicle is empty, was he saying that there was nobody in there guarding it, or that it didn't have any documents in it anymore?
I believe he was saying that there was no one else there, so that it was strange because there was no one else in the conventicle of Saren, not because there was nothing inside.
Well, that's going to be a treasure trove for Sazed. I hope it is. Yeah. I want more info. I want a lore dump episode.
You're hoping so badly, especially after some of our Tailcana shit. It's just like, give me the meat. Give me the meat. Yeah, no, I feel that. I feel that. Mm-hmm. So with that, the final little tidbit of the week that we get to feast on before we go into next week is the logbook. Again, page 87. It all comes back to poor Elend. I feel bad for him for everything he's forced to endure, for what he's been forced to become. This is interesting. It's a very nuanced portrayal from Quan.
Yeah, poor guy.
Poor guy.
I kind of hope we get some sort of glimpse from Quan's perspective of what happens to Elend. That's going to be maybe a little bit more difficult to get a straight answer, understanding that he's not actually on the quest with him.
Sure.
But rumor spreads, so who knows?
Yeah, I agree with you. We're in an interesting spot right now. Yeah. And that's, I don't know. We'll see how it pays off.
We will.
El Capitan. All right. With that, we would generally move into PJ's predictions. We don't have any to pay off this week. We don't have any to talk about. So we would generally move into questions of the week, but this is the first week for a new book. So we have a new question to give to you guys out there. I think we'd posed the question of what's your favorite sparring or practice fight in a former media? And I definitely know my answer here. It's from a video game. It's from a very popular video game that I've been unable to finish because I'm colorblind. And that's enough of a hint for most people, most friends, I guess, to interpret or interpolate what I'm suggesting. But
there are several games that you've been like unable to play.
No, there's only one. There's only one that's given me enough trouble that I've been unable to complete it.
Okay.
Frustratingly so.
Yeah. I can't remember what it is because I know you've complained about games in the past, but it's never like stopped you from playing it entirely.
Right. There's only one game that I've ever stopped.
Yeah.
because of my colorblindness. But
Okay.
anyway,
Gotcha.
that's a hint. But think about that. Think about your favorite sparring moment, your favorite moment between characters, dueling, sparring, practicing. There's another one from another book that I'll talk about eventually too. But yeah, those are a couple.
Sounds good.
So cool. We'll talk about that next week. Send those in. PJ, do you have anything else for this week?
I'm just happy you guys are along for the ride with me because this is a fun journey.
Yes, it is. All right, with that, next week, our reading is going to be from chapters 8 through 12. So in the paperback, that's pages 78 through 136. I believe this is actually the end of part 1, if I remember correctly. I think I did it. I think maybe. No, never mind. It's not. So it's going to be... It's right there. Anyway, so chapters 8 through 12. So 78 through 136. So with that, that's where we'll leave you for the week.
Thank you, as always, to Tim and Andrew, our producers, for helping us keep our show's lights on. Also, check out all the links in the show notes. You can find our schedule, Patreon, previous episodes, our websites, all of our social medias, all in one convenient location.
With that, thank you, Jesse, for giving us our first private party, of which we're going to be tackling a piece of media. You're handing us a short story by Kurt Vonnegut called Harrison Bergeron, which is a story from Welcome to the Monkey House by Kurt Vonnegut. Highly recommend, and I'm very excited to talk about this with PJ and to tackle this. This should be out in March. So we'll let you know as soon as that episode comes out, but thank you for being our first private party patron and for sponsoring an episode. This is super cool and very unique. We appreciate you for coming on and doing that and supporting the show.
Have we already read this part in previous episodes? If you are inclined to look us up or reach out to us, you can do so on Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit at wordswhiskeypod. You can email us at wordsandwhiskeyshow@gmail.com, and you could find our Patreon at patreon.com/wordsandwhiskey.
Beyond that, thank you so much for your support. It really means the world to us, and we will see you next week.
Have a good one.